Hello friends, I'm so happy to welcome you to Holly Lolly's channel. I know that since you subscribed and started watching me, you love Japan, right? And you probably dream of traveling here. Today we're going to talk about the mistakes you shouldn't make, and maybe I'll give you some useful tips on what you need to know before you come to Japan. In Japan, it is customary to eat either with chopsticks, or there are some dishes that are eaten with your hands. Forks are not very popular here, but don't worry, you can always ask the waiter to bring you a fork if they only bring you chopsticks and you don't know how to use them. It's enough to either use a translator or just learn the word fork. In English it's fork, and in Japanese it's foku. Foku onegaishimasu, which means fork, please. If you want a spoon, say supun onegaishimasu. If you find this difficult, just write what you need, your request, in the translator and show it to the waiter. You don't even have to read it out, and everything will be brought to you. Don't be afraid to use a translator in public places to communicate with the Japanese. The Japanese have their own rules of behavior at the table, and it's 100% forgivable if you're a foreigner and you don't know them. But it'll be better for you if you at least familiarize yourself with the basic rules and observe them. Before you start eating, it would be great if you memorize the phrase itadakimasu and said it before you start eating. That's how it's done in Japan. Now, let's talk about chopsticks. You can't knock chopsticks on the table, lick them, poke them, or point at someone. It's also not customary to spear food on chopsticks. And never, if you're eating rice, stick the chopsticks into the rice. That's only done in Japan at funerals. It's usually best to start with the less calorie-dense food and then move on to the more calorie-dense food. If you do the opposite, the fatty food will overpower the flavor of the lean meal. It's common to start with less calorie-dense foods and then move on to more calorie-dense foods. If you do the opposite, you won't taste the flavor of the lean meal after the fatty meal. You'll be making the locals in Japan very happy if you can learn at least the most basic Japanese words and use them. For instance, you should learn at least konnichiwa, which means hello. Another useful word to know is sumimasen, which means excuse me, please. In Japan, it's standard practice to start a sentence with sumimasen, which means excuse me, before asking for something or just saying something. And if someone has done something wrong, like accidentally hurt someone, you should say gomen nasai. That's basically an apology. It's not just a request or an address to a person, it's an apology. Also, don't forget to say thank you in Japanese. Arigatou gozaimasu. Arigatou means thank you, gozaimasu means thank you very much. Or you can say domo arigatou gozaimasu, a mega huge thank you. When you want to ask for something, you usually say please. In Japanese this is, as I said earlier, onegaishimasu. When you ask for the fork, for example, you also say please, onegaishimasu. If you speak like that, the Japanese will be really happy. They always notice it and say you speak Japanese very well if you know how to pronounce at least some phrases, even the most basic ones. Also, when you're traveling to Japan, it's a good idea to think in advance where you'll have breakfast. You'll never have any trouble finding food in Tokyo at any time of the day. However, if you're staying in another city, here's what you need to know. I had a bit of a shock when I got to another city and found out that most places just don't open until 12 or 11. They're closed. If you get up early in the morning and your hotel doesn't include breakfast, komenis are your only option for food. Just a heads up, if breakfast is included in the room price and it is written that you can have breakfast until 10 a.m., it's important to know that it doesn't mean you can come in 5 to 10 minutes before 10 and start eating. No, it means that this cafe or restaurant will close at 10 o'clock sharp, so you'll need to finish up and leave by then. It's better to come in advance, for example at 9:30, 9:20 or 9 to have time to eat and leave before 10. Just to let you know that the place closes at 10. If you're eating at a food court, please make sure you clean up after yourself. In Japan, it's common to show respect to staff and others by thanking them for their work. So, just make sure you throw away all the trash before you leave and wipe your table so it's clean afterwards. For instance, when we go to the gym, we have to wipe down the machines with a sanitizer. At first, we were given special disposable paper napkins, but now they give us a towel and a sanitizer so that you can wipe the machine well after yourself. This shows respect to the next person who comes to use it after you. The same goes for food courts. It's important to keep things tidy so that other people will want to come in and enjoy it too. You came into a clean area, and you felt good, so you should make it nice for the next person who comes along. Another rule I love is not to leave a tip. Here in Japan, the service is really high level, and the Japanese believe that they work exclusively for their wages. Tipping is seen more as a handout. You can even offend the Japanese with this, so don't leave a tip. There are, of course, small exceptions. For example, perhaps you will take a tour from a private guide, and then, perhaps, you can leave them a tip. But in other situations, it's better not to leave a tip. If you smoke, Please smoke in the designated areas. It's not common or allowed to smoke on the street here, only in the designated areas. By the way, in Japan it's a good idea to have an extra pair of spare socks in your bag or backpack. Why is that? Because in many places you have to take off your shoes. And, of course, it'll be an unpleasant surprise if you don't have socks and you need to walk somewhere without shoes. For instance, some hotels just won't let you in with shoes on. You'll have to take them off and, for example, put on slippers. This is, of course, everyone's business, but I'd personally prefer to wear public slippers with socks, although they are very clean. You might also come across this in places where you go to eat. These are usually traditional Japanese-style places where you have to take your shoes off. Therefore, it's a good idea to have socks with you. There are also some cool museums where you have to take off your shoes. So just be aware of this, and it's probably a good idea to have socks with you anyway. They don't take up much space, so it's always better to have them than not to have them. In Japan, there are a lot of rules about how not to behave in public places, and it would probably take more than one video to cover all of them. I'll just run through the basics. Firstly, please don't speak loudly in public places. Please be as quiet as you can, as silence is much appreciated here. For instance, if you're riding the subway with someone, you'll need to communicate in almost whisper mode because loud laughter or conversation will irritate the Japanese. They almost never talk on public transport, just in very quiet voices. A lot of them wear headphones, but they never turn them up to maximum volume because that would also embarrass the person sitting next to them. There's a strong culture of respect for others, your neighbors, so always think about the fact that you're surrounded by other people and that you might make them uncomfortable. After all, you're a tourist in their country, so it's important to respect their rules. It's also not common practice to pass money from hand to hand here. If, for example, you buy something in the supermarket, there's a special place to put the money, and the cashier takes it and then gives you your change back in the same place. Just a heads up, Japan is a left-handed country, so driving and walking should be on the left side of the road. The Japanese always follow the rules, and everyone walks in single file. And there are also very narrow pavements here, if there are any at all. Sometimes there are no sidewalks at all, just a space for pedestrians on the road marked by a special white strip. People walk in a line on the left side, one by one, and please stick to these rules, because if you walk on the right side, the Japanese won't know where to put themselves. Just to let you know that everyone here follows the rules, so if everyone walks on the left side, you should walk like that too, please. Otherwise, you'll be all over the place, not knowing where to put yourself, and the Japanese won't know how to deal with you on the road. Ultimately, you'll start bowing to each other, which might feel a bit awkward. It's probably best to stick to the rules and walk on the left side. I'd also like to share my experience with the SIM card. When you're traveling to other countries, you can usually buy a local SIM card. In many countries, it's easy to do, but in Japan it's not so simple. You can't buy a standard SIM card with the ability to make calls with a tourist visa. You can only buy a special data SIM. This is a SIM card you can buy and use while you're in Japan. You can top it up, but it's only for internet use. Basically, you buy a certain amount of internet data and can use the SIM card while you run out of it. Unfortunately, there's no option to make calls. This is just a travel SIM, so you can use the internet when you need it. That's all there is to it. Just to flag up that my SIM card, which I use for calls, took 3 weeks to process here. It was quite the adventure. First, you need a visa that's valid for at least a year to buy a SIM card. So, as I had it, I came with this visa to buy a SIM card. I showed them my documents and asked them to issue me a SIM card. They take a look at it and say, "You don't have a registration." At the time, we were moving around quite a bit. We lived like that for about a year, moving from apartment to apartment and from hotel to hotel. And I ran into an issue when we were staying in the hotel. I didn't have a registration. They told me I needed to register immediately. We went to the hotel to try to sort it out, but it was still a separate quest. We were still registered at the hotel, though. Finally, I went back and said that now I not only have a visa, I also have a registration. Let me get a SIM card. They said you do have a registration, but you don't have a bank account. You need to open an account in a Japanese bank for us to issue you a SIM card. I went to a Japanese bank. There were a lot of steps involved to open an account there too. Not all banks were willing to do it, but one bank agreed to open an account for us. I opened the account, came back to try to get a SIM card. I've already done a few takes, but I can't remember what the third item was. It's probably my number. My number is similar to a taxpayer number, but I remember that on the third occasion we went to get a SIM card, we were told that we didn't have some other document. Once we finally had all the documents together, we were told that we had to take the day off to get the SIM cards because it takes 2 hours per person, and there are 5 of us in total. It takes about 2 hours to fill out all the documents and forms. We thought, oh my goodness, how? Anyway, we found another consultant who was willing to issue us a SIM card. He got it done pretty quickly, by the way. It probably took about 40 minutes or an hour. It was a real miracle for me. Just imagine how I felt when my move to Japan started with that. I thought, how am I going to get everything else done? How am I going to live here if I have to deal with every issue for 3 weeks? Well, for a tourist, this is more of a poetic interlude. I mentioned a few of the potential challenges that might arise for those moving to a new country, but for tourists, this information is probably a bit unnecessary. But for someone who's planning to live here, I think it's useful to know. It's also useful for general development info. If you're planning on visiting an onsen in Japan, you'll need to make sure your tattoos are covered. And by the way, if you go to the swimming pool, you also need to cover all tattoos with special plasters so that tattoos on your body cannot be seen. Just so you know, you'll also need to remove any jewelry. An onsen is the place to go to relax, not to wash off the dirt. So, before you head to the onsen, make sure you give yourself a good clean in the shower, then go naked, in your birthday suit, into the onsen. So, just be prepared for this. Don't think you can just take swimsuits or swimming trunks. You'll need to go to the onsen without clothes. If you're planning a trip to Tokyo, I can give you some tips on where to stay. If you're looking for a lively, noisy atmosphere and want to experience something similar to Times Square, then the Shibuya area is a great choice. There's plenty to see and do there, including cinemas, cafes, noisy parties, dancing, and lots more. There's even a statue of Hachiko. The Shinjuku neighborhood is a bit more subdued, but it's still a great place to party. There are also bus and train stations nearby. If you want to experience the atmosphere of the old city, you can visit Omoida Yokocho, a lane where the old and authentic city atmosphere reigns. There are lots of tiny cafes, each with its own delicious aroma. There are, by the way, plenty of places where you can enter without shoes. You can sit in a yoga pose and eat, which is a great way to experience the authentic atmosphere. If you're looking for a great place to relax and take a stroll, the Gwain Park is the perfect spot. The Ginza district is home to all the most stylish and expensive boutiques. Everything there is expensive, and, of course, it's easier to find a luxury hotel there than budget accommodation. If you're looking to experience traditional Japanese culture and see geisha and other local traditions, the Osakusa area is a great choice. You'll need to use a translator pretty much everywhere, as there are very few signs in English and menus in restaurants are often only in Japanese. I found the best way is to choose places where there are pictures on the menu so you can point to what you want and ask the waiter to bring it to you. This is where Pocket Talk will come in handy. Although it's unlikely you'd want to buy a Pocket Talk for just one trip. We have a Pocket Talk that the kids use. This is a device you speak into, which immediately translates and speaks to your interlocutor what you said. There are also models with a camera, so you can take a picture of the text and see the translation. But why would you need a separate device when you have phones with built-in translators that can also take a picture and translate it, as well as speak or write something and get a translation? So don't be afraid to use the translator. We should also remember that hotel rooms in Japan are tiny, very, very small. If you're traveling alone, you can even test your luck by trying out a capsule hotel. It is said the space in capsule hotels is about 2 square meters. You get a small TV, and if you've got not much luggage, you're probably comfortable there, in a kind of compact way, though maybe not very comfortably. You'll get a place to sleep. It's pretty affordable, but if you're traveling with a big group, it's probably not the best option. If you're traveling as a couple, I guess it'll still be comfortable to rent such a small room in a hotel. Just to let you know, my first trip to Japan was almost 10 years ago. When we got there, we were pretty taken aback because we opened the door and immediately to the left was the bathroom, and right at the entrance was a bed. There was no closet, and we could barely fit our suitcase in. It was pretty tricky to get into the room. We had to lift the suitcase, close the door, and move it back into place. It was a pretty small room. If you're traveling with children, be prepared for the same problem with an extra bed. It'll be very difficult to put it somewhere. Another thing we often run into is that we have 2 kids, so there's often no space for the second child to put a bed somewhere. That's a problem. So so it's worth checking in advance if hotels have the option of having a bed delivered. If there's no option to check the box, it means there won't be space to put an extra bed. Of course, we do not forget that on the trip you need to take with you a first aid kit with our proven medicines, the most basic ones for headaches, fever, diarrhea, and many other things, but the most important. In Japan, of course, there are pharmacies, a lot of them, but medications that you may urgently need here and now, so that they work quickly and help, can be sold by prescription, so it can be difficult to get medications. So keep a first aid kit with you. And if you are taking a prescription-only medication, have that prescription with you. Because, for example, at the customs control you may be asked to show the prescription so that you do not have problems. So be aware, prepare in advance, learn what means cannot be imported into the country, so that then you do not have problems. In Japan you don't have to spend a fortune on a restaurant or cafeteria to get a tasty and balanced meal. It's easy to get a good meal just by going to the store, especially in the evening. There are discounts. You can get discounts of up to 50% because in Japan they are very cautious and over-reassure. As a result, you often find the expiry date on ready-to-eat products is much sooner than the product will actually be stored. Obviously, it depends on the dish and the products, but I know that a lot of food can still be eaten safely after 2 or 3 days. It's not like in our countries where we have many places where they can even restick the price tags. Once the expiry date has passed, the price tag is reapplied and the product is sold again. This is not something you'll see here at all. Even milk is labeled with a 2 to 3 day shelf life, and you can open it after a while and it's still good. Eggs have an expiration date on them, which shows when you can use them raw, and you can add a week to use them in cooking. That's why you can buy great quality food here, and you can buy ready-made food in supermarkets that's just as good as what you'd get in a cafeteria, and save money. At home in the evening, you can enjoy a quiet atmosphere and a meal. It's also great that there are big discounts in the stores in the evening. It goes without saying that when you check out of a hotel, you can ask at the reception to leave your suitcase for you to come back for it. For example, in the evening before you leave for the airport. But in Japan, you can also leave your belongings in luggage lockers. At the big subway stations, there are always lockers you can use, depending on the size of your luggage. So there are these little cameras, and then there are bigger ones where you can stick your suitcase in and put a coin in, basically paying for storage, and then you can just go about your business. And as I know, you can store your things there for 24 hours. This is really handy if you want to visit a nearby town but don't want to carry all your luggage there. You can leave it at a major station and pick it up from the storage room on the way back. As you probably know, bowing is pretty common in Japan. It's a common practice to bow in Japan, and it's something that everyone does, everywhere. If you're apologizing, you bow. If you're thanking someone for something, you bow. This shows respect and honor to the person you're talking to. So please don't shake hands, it's just not done here. Basically, you can't touch anyone, tap on the shoulder, or so on. Even when people are sitting on the subway, you'll notice how they put their elbows together so as not to touch their neighbors. Personal space is highly valued here, so it's best to observe how others interact and follow their example. Of course, you don't want to be the odd one out and stick out like a sore thumb. It's unlikely that Japanese people will say to you, "Oh, what a cool dude you are, you don't follow our rules." It's only fair that when you're respected, you respect others. The depth and length of the bow depends on the situation and the social status of the person you're bowing to. In Japan, it's not common to express your feelings in public, like by kissing or hugging. This is because it's not part of the culture here. The most you can do is hold hands. That's all for now. Please give us a like, subscribe to the channel, and stay tuned for more videos. A great arigato to everyone for watching. Bye bye!